Three ungrateful children decided to get rid of their elderly parents once and for all. They dumped Rose and Anthony on a deserted road, left to their own fate to die under the scorching sun. "You're a burden we can't handle anymore," they said before speeding away in their black Mercedes and disappearing on the horizon. But these cold-hearted monsters didn't know they were throwing away $20 million. Rose woke up that morning with a tightness in her chest that she knew all too well. It wasn't physical pain, she could tell the difference after 70 years of life. It was that anguish that grows in your soul when you feel you're no longer welcome in the place that should be your home. The house was silent, but it was a heavy silence, loaded with tension. Anthony was still sleeping beside her, breathing with difficulty because of his age and heart problems that worried them so much. She watched him for a moment, seeing the wrinkles that time had drawn on the face of the man she'd loved for 50 years. A face marked by honest work, by sleepless nights when the children were sick, by smiles given even when everything seemed difficult. "How did we get here, my love?" she whispered softly, gently touching his gray hair. Rose got up slowly, each movement a battle against joints that complained. In the kitchen, she began preparing breakfast, as she always did, even knowing it would be received with sour faces and complaints about wasting money on food. "Mom, this waste again." Sandra appeared at the kitchen door still in her robe, but with an expression that would freeze anyone's blood. "Look how many eggs you're frying. We don't have money to spare for this extravagance." Rose felt her heart tighten once more. 3 eggs. Just 3 eggs for 4 people. Where was the extravagance in that? "Daughter, I thought you'd want to eat something before leaving for work." "I eat on the street. It's cheaper than supporting this waste every day." Sandra threw a pile of medical bills on the kitchen table with a dry thud. "By the way, look what arrived yesterday. Another $500 in medications for Dad." $500, Mom. That's more than half of what I spend on myself in an entire month." Rose looked at the bills scattered on the table as if they were accusations. Each prescription, each exam, each pill had become a reason for discussion, proof that they were an unbearable burden for their children. "Sandra, daughter, the doctor said these are essential medications for your father's heart." "Essential?" Sandra let out a bitter laugh that cut through the kitchen air. "You know what's essential? Me being able to pay my own bills without having to support 2 people who contribute nothing to this house." The words hit Rose like stab wounds. Contribute nothing. Was that what she had become in her own daughter's eyes? A woman who had raised 3 children, who had sewn their clothes, cooked their meals, spent sleepless nights when they were sick, who had worked washing clothes for others when money was tight, now she contributed nothing. Anthony appeared in the kitchen, staggering a little from the morning dizziness that came with his blood pressure medications. His face was still marked by the pillow, but Rose saw in his eyes that he had heard the argument. "Good morning, daughter," he said to Sandra, trying to smile as he always did, even when everything seemed to collapse around them. Sandra didn't even respond. She grabbed a slice of bread, spread a thin layer of margarine, and left the kitchen chewing angrily, as if each bite was a protest against her parents' existence. Rose served coffee to Anthony with trembling hands. They sat at the table in silence, eating slowly, each lost in thoughts that hurt too much to be shared. "She didn't mean it," Anthony murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. "She did, my dear. And she's right." Rose stared at her plate as if she could find some answer there. "We've become a burden to them." "Rose, don't talk like that. It's the truth, Anthony. Look how we live here. Afraid to turn on an extra light, afraid to eat an extra egg, afraid to exist." The sound of the front door opening interrupted the conversation. Robert arrived from his night shift at the factory, with his uniform dirty with grease and an expression of fatigue that seemed to have become permanent on his face. He entered the kitchen, looked at his parents sitting at the table, and sighed deeply, like someone preparing to face another problem. "Dad, I need to talk to you." His voice had a formal, distant tone that Rose didn't recognize. This wasn't the boy she had comforted when he had nightmares. "Of course, son. What is it?" Robert pulled up a chair and sat heavily. "The situation can't continue like this. Sandra is right when she says the medical expenses are becoming unsustainable. Rose felt the ground collapse under her feet. Robert had always been the most balanced of the three children, the one who tried to mediate discussions. If even he was. Son, we can try to reduce the medications, talk to the doctor about cheaper options. Anthony spoke with a choked voice. It's not just that, Dad. It's everything. The food, the electricity, the water, the space. This house doesn't accommodate 5 adults anymore. 5 adults. Rose chewed these words in her mind. When had they stopped being parents and become just adults to their own children? We're thinking of a solution, Robert continued, avoiding his parents' gaze. A solution that would be better for everyone. What kind of solution? Rose asked, although she already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. There's a place, a nursing home. It's not one of the bad ones. It's in a decent neighborhood. You'd have medical assistants, other people your age to talk to. You want to institutionalize us? Anthony's voice came out as a whisper. It's not institutionalization, Dad. It's an opportunity for you to have a life more suitable for your age. Rose felt tears burning in her eyes. Robert, this house was built brick by your father. Every corner has our family's history. Mom, please, don't complicate things. You know the situation is unsustainable. Bruno appeared at the kitchen door at that moment, still in pajamas, despite it being almost noon. At 32 years old, he still lived with his parents, but treated the house as if it were a hotel where he had the right to complain about the service. Are you talking about the nursing home? He asked, yawning. It was about time. Last night I couldn't sleep properly again because of Dad's cough, and Mom keeps getting up at dawn to go to the bathroom. It's not a nursing home, Bruno. Robert tried to correct, but without much conviction. Whatever the name. The important thing is to solve this situation quickly. My girlfriend doesn't even want to come here anymore because she feels embarrassed seeing you two around the corners. Bruno's words were like precise stabs in Rose's heart. Embarrassed. They embarrassed people with their simple existence. Anthony got up from the table slowly, each movement seeming to require superhuman effort. I'm going for a walk, he murmured. She knew he was leaving to cry where the children couldn't see. Anthony had always been like that, he kept his pain to himself, protected others from his sadness. Mom! Robert tried a softer tone. We're not doing this out of malice. It's just that life has become very difficult for everyone. Rose looked at her son, who had been her pride, the first to get a steady job, the one who always brought his entire salary home when he lived with them. Where was that responsible boy who had promised to take care of his parents when they got old? I understand, son. You have your lives, your commitments. So you'll agree to go to the nursing home? Rose remained silent for a long moment. Through the kitchen window, she could see Anthony in the small garden he maintained with such care, even with back pain. He was standing in front of the tomato plants he had planted, his shoulders curved by the weight of rejection. We need to talk, she said finally. Let us think about it. Don't take too long. Sandra appeared again, already dressed to leave. I already scheduled a visit there for tomorrow. The sooner we resolve this, the better for everyone. Rose watched her 3 children leave the house. Robert to sleep before the next shift. Sandra for work. Bruno to meet friends at the bar, as he did every afternoon. The house fell silent again, but now it was a different silence. It was the silence of approaching abandonment, like a storm. She went out to the garden and found Anthony sitting on the small bench he had built years ago, when the grandchildren still came to visit and played among the plants. Did you hear? He asked without looking at her. I heard. 50 years of marriage, Rose. 3 children raised with so much love. I know, my dear. Did we fail? Were we bad parents? Rose sat beside her husband and held his work-calloused hand. We gave everything we had, Anthony. Everything we were. And now we're a burden. They sat there hand in hand, looking at the garden that would soon no longer be theirs. The flowers Rose planted with such care, the herbs she grew to flavor the meals no one thanked her for anymore, the fruits Anthony harvested with pride, everything would be left behind. "Rose," Anthony said quietly. "If we go to that place, it'll be to die." She knew he was right. They knew other people who had been placed in nursing homes by their children. Few lasted more than a year. Not because of medical care, but because of broken hearts. "At least we'll be together," she murmured, squeezing his hand. But deep in her chest, Rose felt that something was about to change. She didn't know what. She didn't know how, but there was a strange restlessness in the air, as if fate was preparing something none of them could imagine. Inside Anthony's old wallet, kept between old photographs of the children when they still loved them, there was a yellowed envelope he didn't even know existed. An envelope that had arrived years ago and that Rose had saved without opening, thinking it was just another one of those bank advertisements. Fate has its own plans, and sometimes justice arrives when we least expect it, coming from the most unexpected places. 3 weeks had passed since the conversation in the kitchen, and the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. Rose woke up every day with a queasy stomach, as if she sensed something terrible was approaching. Anthony could barely eat, and she knew it wasn't just because of his heart medication. The children had completely changed their behavior. There were no more casual conversations, no more good mornings or good nights. They entered and left the house like irritated tenants who barely tolerated the presence of the owners. That fateful morning, Rose was in the laundry room hanging clothes when she heard low voices coming from the living room. She immediately recognized the conspiratorial tone. It was the same one the children used when they were little and plotting some mischief, but now the mischief would be with them. "Is everything arranged?" It was Sandra's voice, whispering as if planning a crime. "Robert already arranged with the people from the nursing home. They're coming this afternoon." Rose felt her legs go weak. Today. They hadn't even warned them. What if they don't want to go? Bruno asked, and Rose could imagine the expression of contempt on her youngest son's face. "They will," Robert answered with a firmness that froze Rose's blood. "Because they have no choice." "Did you explain that it's temporary?" Sandra asked, but there was something in her voice that Rose couldn't decipher. A strange hesitation. "Of course it's not temporary." Bruno laughed quietly. "Do you know any old person who came back from the nursing home?" Rose's world collapsed at that moment. She leaned against the washing machine to keep from falling. They were talking about getting rid of their parents forever, like discarding old furniture. "We'll say it's just until they adapt better," Robert continued. Then they'll get used to it there." "What about the house?" Sandra asked. "Finally we'll have space to live like normal people." "I've thought about it," Bruno answered with animation that cut Rose's heart like a blade. "I can turn their room into my office. I've always wanted to work from home." Rose covered her mouth with her hands to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. The room where she and Anthony had shared 50 years of dreams, fears, joys, and sorrows would be turned into an office for the son who had never worked properly in his life. "When they arrive, we'll all be here together," Robert instructed like a general commanding a military operation. "It has to seem like we're doing this out of love, understand?" "Out of love," Sandra repeated, and Rose caught the venomous sarcasm in her daughter's voice. "That's right. We'll cry a little. We'll say it's difficult for us too, that we'll visit them every week." "Are we going to visit?" Bruno asked, and Rose heard the genuine surprise in the question. "Obviously not," Robert laughed quietly. "But they don't need to know that now." Rose left the laundry room staggering, feeling as if she had been punched in the stomach. She found Anthony in the garden, watering the tomatoes with mechanical movements, lost in thoughts she knew were as painful as hers. "Anthony," she whispered, gripping his arm tightly. He turned and saw the despair stamped on his wife's face. "What happened, my dear?" "Today. They're coming to get us today." Anthony dropped the hose on the ground. The water continued flowing, soaking the earth around the tomato plants he would never see grow. "How do you mean?" Rose told everything she had heard, every poisoned word, every cruel plan. Anthony grew paler until he was the color of old paper. Without even warning us, he murmured, his voice coming out like the moan of a wounded animal. Anthony, they don't want us anymore. Really, forever. They hugged right there in the middle of the garden, crying like two lost children. 50 years of marriage, 3 children raised with unconditional love, a lifetime of work and dedication. And this was how it would end. An hour later, Rose was in the bedroom packing some clothes in an old suitcase when Sandra appeared at the door. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Rose didn't respond. She continued folding clothes with automatic movements, as if preparing for any trip. "Mom, listen here." Sandra entered the room with determined steps. "Some people arrived here from the nursing home. They came to get you." "I know." Rose didn't lift her eyes from the clothes. "How do you know?" "I heard you talking. I heard everything." Sandra had the decency to look embarrassed for a moment. She looked at her feet, fidgeted with her hands, sighed deeply, but when she raised her head again, the expression had hardened once more. "Then you know it's for everyone's good." "For everyone's good, daughter?" "For our good would be staying in the house we built with so much love." "Mom, please, don't complicate things. The people are waiting downstairs." Rose finally looked at her daughter. Sandra was dressed in expensive clothes, had done her nails, her hair was perfectly arranged. She looked like an executive explaining an inevitable dismissal. "Sandra," Rose spoke slowly, each word weighing tons. "Do you remember when you were 5 years old and had pneumonia?" "Mom. Do you remember that I spent 2 weeks without sleeping, taking care of you day and night? That was a long time ago. Do you remember when Robert broke his arm and we didn't have money for a private doctor, so I sold my wedding ring to pay for the hospital?" Sandra looked away. Things were different back then. "Do you remember when Bruno lost his first job and was unemployed for 6 months, and we shared our food with him even while we were struggling?" "Mom, stop it." "No, daughter, I won't stop." Rose stood up, and for the first time in months, Sandra saw strength in her mother's posture. "Because now that it's our turn to need help, you treat us like garbage." "We're not treating anyone like garbage. We're trying to find the best solution." "The best solution for whom, Sandra?" Before Sandra could answer, Robert appeared at the bedroom door. "Mom, the people from the home are waiting. They have appointments at other places." Rose looked at both children at the bedroom door. Robert avoided her eyes, looking anywhere except at her. Sandra drummed her fingers on the door, anxious to finish the situation quickly. "Where's Bruno?" Rose asked. "Him. He had to go out." Robert lied badly. Rose knew Bruno didn't have the courage to even show up. The coward had run away to avoid witnessing the goodbye moment. "I'll call Dad," she said, closing the suitcase with a click that sounded like a final sentence. Anthony was in the living room, sitting in a chair like a defendant awaiting sentence. Beside him, 2 uniformed women waited with professional smiles trained to disguise the sadness of the situation. "Mr. Anthony," one of them spoke with a voice too sweet, too artificial. "You're going to love our home. It has a garden, other people your age, medical assistants." Anthony didn't respond, just stared at his hands, as if they could give him some answer to this nightmare. "He's not feeling very well today," Robert explained to the women. "He's a bit confused because of his age." Rose came down the stairs and saw the scene. Her husband being treated like a problematic child, the children anxious to get rid of the problem, the home employees pretending this was normal. "Let's go, Anthony." Rose extended her hand to her husband. "It seems our presence here is no longer desired." "Mom, don't talk like that." Sandra tried a conciliatory tone. "You know we love you." Rose stopped in the middle of the living room and turned to her 3 children. Robert still avoided her eyes. Sandra pretended a sadness she didn't feel. Bruno remained absent like the coward he had always been. "If you really loved us," Rose spoke with a voice that cut the air like a sharp blade, "you never would have let it get to this point." "Mom. If you really loved us, you would have talked to us before scheduling this removal." "We're talking now." Robert tried to argue. You're communicating a decision you've already made. That's not a conversation, son. That's an eviction. One of the employees cleared her throat discreetly. Excuse me for interrupting, but we really have other appointments today. Rose took Anthony's hand and squeezed it tightly. He was shaking, and she knew it wasn't just from cold. All right, she said finally. Let's go. The walk to the van was the longest of Rose's life. Each step on the sidewalk she had swept thousands of times, each look at the garden Anthony cared for with such love, each breath of the air from the house where they had been happy for so many years. The neighbors peered out their windows, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. Mrs. Lourdes, the 60-year-old neighbor, waved sadly. She knew what was happening. Everyone knew. Robert and Sandra accompanied them to the van, making sure to seem sad in front of the home employees, but Rose saw through the cheap acting. We'll visit you next week. Sandra lied, giving her mother a kiss on the cheek that burned like hot iron. We'll call tomorrow to see how you're doing. Robert added another lie to the collection. Rose and Anthony got into the van without looking back. When the vehicle began to move, Rose saw through the rear window her two children quickly returning to the house, as if wanting to flee from the scene of the crime they had just committed. Rose, Anthony whispered, squeezing her hand. How did we get to this point? I don't know, my love. I don't know. The van continued down the street they knew by heart, passing the bakery where they bought bread every morning, the pharmacy where they picked up medications, the square where they took their grandchildren to play when they were still welcome in their own children's lives. Each block that moved away was a piece of life left behind forever. In Anthony's old wallet, kept between old documents, the yellowed envelope remained sealed. Inside it, news that would change everything, but that would only be discovered when it was too late for the children who had thrown away the purest love they would ever receive. Destiny was preparing its own justice, and when it arrived, it would be merciless. 2 weeks at the nursing home. Rose woke up once more to the deafening noise of 15 little old ladies coughing at the same time in the collective dormitory. The smell of medicine mixed with urine and disinfectant had become part of the air she breathed, stuck to her skin like a mark of abandonment that wouldn't come off even with bathing. Anthony was in the bed beside her, but seemed to have shrunk to half his size since they arrived there. His eyes, once bright even in sadness, were now opaque like fogged glass. He barely spoke, barely ate, barely moved. It was as if he were dying little by little, a piece each day. Anthony, she whispered, extending her hand through the minimal space between the beds. How did you sleep? He turned his head slowly, each movement seeming to require superhuman effort. I dreamed about our garden, Rose. I dreamed I was watering the tomatoes. Her eyes filled with tears. 2 weeks and the children hadn't called even once, not once to know if they were still alive. Nurse Josefa, a 50-year-old woman who looked like she had lost all patience with life, entered the dormitory clapping her hands as if calling chickens. Come on, come on. Breakfast time. Anyone who doesn't get up now goes without eating. Rose helped Anthony get up. He trembled like a leaf in the wind, and she knew it wasn't just because of age, it was because of a soul broken into 1,000 pieces. In the cafeteria, they sat at the same table as always, with Mrs. Conceição, who cried quietly every morning, and Mr. Benedito, who kept calling for children who never appeared. My daughter said she was going to visit me yesterday, Mrs. Conceição murmured while stirring oatmeal that looked like glue. I wonder if she forgot where I am. Rose and Anthony exchanged glances. They knew Mrs. Conceição's daughter wasn't forgotten. She simply didn't want to know about her mother anymore, like so many other families who dumped their elderly there and disappeared from the map. Rose! Anthony whispered, pushing the bowl of porridge away from him. I can't stand this place anymore. I know, my dear. I can't either. If we left here, where would we go, Anthony? Our children don't want us anymore. The house is no longer ours. Anthony remained silent for a long moment, chewing words that hurt too much to be said. Finally, he raised his eyes and Rose saw there a determination she hadn't seen in weeks. Rose, if we're going to die anyway, let it be on the street, breathing fresh air, not in this place that smells like death. She felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was something like hope, a desperate hope. But still, hope. Are you serious? I am. We can take our things and leave. We're not prisoners. But Anthony, where will we go? Anywhere that's far from here. Anywhere we can die with dignity. 3 days later, at dawn, Rose had been awake for hours, staring at the peeling ceiling of the dormitory. Beside her, Anthony breathed with difficulty, but she knew he wasn't sleeping either. They had spent the last 3 days planning in whispers, like two prisoners plotting an escape. The night shift nurse had dozed off in the reception chair, as she always did around 5 in the morning. It was the window of opportunity they had been waiting for. Now, Anthony whispered. They got up slowly, each movement calculated not to make noise. Rose took the plastic bag where she kept her few clothes. Anthony put on his worn coat, which was his only protection against the dawn cold. They walked on tiptoe through the corridor that smelled of despair and abandonment. They passed the reception where the nurse was snoring quietly, her head thrown back in the chair. The front door was locked, but Anthony knew a way. He had observed for days how the employees opened it in the morning. He turned the key slowly, the metal creaking like a muffled scream. The dawn air hit them like a cold slap, but it was the purest air they had breathed in weeks. Rose held Anthony's hand tightly, as if he would disappear if she let go. Where to now? She asked, looking at the empty street under the yellow light of the streetlights. Far away, Anthony replied. As far as possible. They began walking down the cracked sidewalk, two figures bent by age and suffering, carrying everything that remained of their lives in an old plastic bag. 6 hours later on the road, the sun was rising when they reached the highway that cut through the city. Rose felt her legs trembling with exhaustion, but continued walking because she knew that stopping meant giving up, and she wasn't ready to give up yet. Anthony stopped every few meters, supporting his hand on his chest and breathing with difficulty. His heart was calling for help, but he pretended he was fine so as not to worry Rose even more. Let's rest a little, she said when she saw he was getting too pale. They sat on the dry grass by the roadside. The car traffic was intense, hurried people going to work, to their organized lives, to their families who loved them. Rose, Anthony spoke with a weak voice. Do you regret leaving? Never. She held his hand tightly. I'd rather die free than live trapped in that place. A truck passed honking, raising a cloud of dust that made them cough. Rose wiped her teary eyes and saw that Anthony's breathing was even more labored. My dear, are you feeling sick? It's just tiredness, he lied. But Rose saw he was sweating cold, despite the morning being cool. They continued walking, each step a battle against fatigue and despair. The road stretched infinitely ahead, and Rose began to wonder if they had made the right decision. But when she looked back and saw the city shrinking in the distance, she knew she preferred 1,000 times to be there, free and lost, than trapped in that home of horrors. Noon, under the scorching sun. Rose, I can't anymore. Anthony stopped in the middle of the road, his legs weak, his face white as paper. The midday sun beat mercilessly on their heads, and they had no water, no food, nowhere to go. Anthony, hang on just a little longer. There must be somewhere near here where we can rest. But she knew she was lying. There was nothing there but hot asphalt, dry grass, and infinite solitude. They were in the middle of nowhere, two elderly people abandoned by their own family, walking to nowhere. Anthony leaned on her, all the weight of his 78 years pressing on Rose's fragile shoulders. She felt her own legs weaken, but forced herself to support the man she had loved for 50 years. Rose, I think I'm going to faint. No, Anthony, not now. We're going to make it. But even as she spoke, she felt he was getting heavier and heavier in her arms. His heart was failing. She could see it from his lips that were beginning to turn blue. Rose, I love you. I love you too, my dear. I always have. They hugged right there, in the middle of the deserted road, while the merciless sun punished their fragile bodies. Rose knew this could be the last hug of their lives. My God, she whispered, looking at the blue and empty sky. If you have any mercy, send someone to help us." As if the prayer had been heard, the rumble of an engine approached. Rose raised her head and saw an old car approaching down the road. It wasn't anything luxurious, it was a white Corsa, all dented, with paint peeling from time. The car slowed down when the driver saw the two elderly people hugging by the roadside. Rose waved desperately, like a castaway waving to a rescue ship. The car stopped. From the door stepped a young man about 30 years old with simple worker's clothes. His eyes were kind, the type of person who still believes it's worth helping others. "My God in heaven, what are you doing here alone?" Marcus ran to them, immediately seeing that Anthony was feeling very sick. "Please," Rose begged with a broken voice. "My husband has a bad heart. He needs help." Marcus didn't hesitate for a second. "Come on, I'll take you to the hospital right now." He helped Anthony into the car, Rose on the other side, holding her husband's hand like a lifeline. Marcus accelerated toward the nearest city, looking in the rearview mirror to see how the elderly man was doing. "How did you end up there?" he asked while driving. Rose didn't know where to begin. How to explain that they were abandoned by their own children? How to tell that they fled from a nursing home because they preferred to die free? "It's a long story," she murmured. "You don't need to tell me now," Marcus said gently. "The important thing is getting to the hospital." During the journey, Rose observed the young man who had stopped to save them. He had hands calloused from hard work, simple but clean clothes, and most importantly, he had in his eyes that kindness she had almost forgotten existed in the world. "What's your name, son?" she asked. "Marcus." "And you?" "I'm Rose." "He's Anthony." "Nice to meet you. And don't worry, everything will be all right." Rose didn't know why, but she believed him. For the first time in months, she felt that maybe fate hadn't completely given up on them. In Anthony's old wallet, the yellowed envelope continued kept between old documents. Inside it, an inheritance that would change everything. But at that moment, the only inheritance that mattered was the kindness of a stranger who decided to stop to help two old people lost on the road. Sometimes angels arrive driving old cars. Anthony opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the white light of the hospital room. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The smell of disinfectant made him fear he had returned to that cursed home. But when he turned his head, he saw Rose sitting in a chair beside the bed, holding his hand tightly. "You came back to me?" she whispered, and Anthony saw her eyes were red from crying so much. "Rose, how long?" "A whole week, my love. You had a serious heart attack. The doctors said it was close." Anthony tried to remember. The road, the scorching sun, the feeling he was going to die right there, abandoned like an animal, and then an angel, a young man with kindness in his eyes who had saved them. "Where is he? Where's the boy who brought us here?" "Marcus?" Rose smiled for the first time in days. "He's outside. He hasn't left here for a minute since we arrived. He's slept in the corridor every night." Anthony felt his eyes fill with tears. A stranger had done for them what their own children hadn't, care whether they lived or died. The door opened softly and Marcus entered carrying a steaming cup of coffee. His eyes lit up when he saw Anthony awake. "Mr. Anthony, thank God." He set down the coffee on a small table and approached the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," Anthony replied with a hoarse but grateful voice. "Thanks to you." "Don't mention it. I just did what anyone would do." Rose and Anthony exchanged glances. No, it wasn't what anyone would do. Their own children hadn't done it. "Marcus," Rose spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "Why did you stop? Why did you help us?" The young man turned red, shifted his feet, looked at the floor. "Ah, Mrs. Rose, it's just that you reminded me of my grandparents. They died when I was little, and I always thought, if one day I saw some elderly people needing help." He couldn't finish the sentence. Anthony extended his trembling hand and Marcus took it carefully, as if he were holding something precious and fragile. "Son, what did we do to deserve your kindness?" "You didn't do anything. Sometimes we just meet the right people at the right moment." 3 days later, at discharge, Dr. Silva, a 50-year-old man who looked like he had seen much suffering, handed the discharge papers to Rose with a worried expression. "Mrs. Rose, I need to be frank with you. Your husband had a serious heart attack. His heart can't handle strong emotions or physical exertion anymore." Rose felt her chest tighten, though inside she felt a squeeze in her heart. "Doctor, we don't have anywhere to go." The doctor hesitated, looked at the papers, then at her. "Your family, do they know you're here?" "They don't want to know about us anymore, doctor." Dr. Silva sighed deeply. He had seen many cases like this, elderly people abandoned by their own children, thrown into hospitals like disposable trash. "Look, Mrs. Rose, I can't officially recommend this, but..." He lowered his voice. "I have a social worker here who knows a family that takes in homeless elderly people. Good-hearted people. Good people still exist in the world." "They do. And you've already met one of them." He pointed to Marcus, who was in the corridor talking to a blonde woman about 40 years old. Rose looked through the room window and saw Marcus gesticulating animatedly, as if explaining something important. The blonde woman listened attentively, nodding her head. "Who is she?" "That's Anna, his wife. Marcus Kaye."